John Alzheimer is known as one of our nation's most recognized credit experts. Having worked for 28 years in the credit industry, John has become one of the most prolific speakers about credit and the go-to authority on answers to credit-related questions. Credit Countdown with John Alzheimer.
Hello, my name is John Alzheimer and I'm a consumer credit expert. And I'm going to spend a few minutes today talking to you about credit card utilization. So why is this an important topic to discuss? Number one, credit card utilization is something that everyone has to deal with, especially if any of us use credit cards. Number two is credit card utilization is a metric in both the FICO and VantageScore credit scoring systems, and it is an important metric, which means that if you do well in this particular category, then your scores are going to be rewarded, and if you're doing poorly in this category, then your scores are going to be penalized. So let me explain what credit card utilization is. And you may hear this referred to as either the debt utilization ratio, revolving utilization ratio, balance to limit ratio. It's all the same thing. Essentially what it is it's the relationship between the balances on your credit cards and the credit limits on your credit cards. And it's important to distinguish between the balances as being what your actual balance is at any point in time during the month, because you know that changes as you're making payments, as you're making new charges, as things are getting returned and credited to your account, if interest or fees are being added to your balance. And so your balance is kind of this dynamic moving balance. As far as how utilization is calculated, it only looks at the balance represented on your credit report. And that balance is going to be whatever your balance was from your previous month's statement. And so if your previous month's statement indicated that your balance was $1,000, then that's what's going to be on your credit reports. That's what's going to be used when calculating this ratio. Just because your balance is zero because you made a payment today, or just because your balance is $800 because you made somewhat of a payment, it doesn't really matter. It matters what's reported to the credit reporting agencies. And so keep that in mind, because a lot of people get confused about that. They think, oh, I pay my credit cards in full every month, so my utilization ratio is zero. Absolutely untrue. If you have a balance appearing on your credit report, then that's the value that's calculated in the utilization ratio. So let's do some math. Let me explain how it's done. This is just simple division, actually. It's the balance divided by the credit limit times 100. And so if you have a credit card with a $1,000 credit limit and a $500 balance is appearing on your credit reports, then all you do is you divide 500 by 1,000, which is going to be 0.5, and then multiply that by 100, which is going to yield 50. You're 50% utilized on that particular credit card. The calculation is performed two ways as far as credit scoring goes. It's going to be calculated on a line item by line item basis. And so every single one of the credit cards on your credit report that is not closed is going to have a ratio associated with it. So if you have 5 credit cards and they all have a zero balance, and your utilization ratio is going to be zero on every single one of those. That's one way that it's calculated. Another way that it's calculated, and this one gets much more attention when people blog about it or talk about it in the media, is what's called aggregate revolving utilization. And aggregate is the sum of all of the balances on your credit cards that appear on your credit report divided by the sum of all of the credit limits on your open credit cards that appear on your credit report. So that's the one that I generally tend to focus on, because that's the one that tends to get more attention. So let's do a math problem taking the aggregate or the combined total of all of your balances and limits to come up with this ratio. Let's say that you have, let's make the math easy. Let's say that you have 10 credit cards, and each of those credit cards has a $1,000 credit limit. And if you look at your credit report, there it is, $1,000 credit limit. So you know that in aggregate, you have $10,000 of credit limit represented on your credit report. And just like the balance, the limit as it's being reported on your credit reports is what's important, not whatever your actual limit is. It's what's on the credit report is the math that's used in the credit scoring systems. Now you have that figure, 10,000. So let's go ahead and set that aside for a moment. Now we need to get the aggregate balance across all those same 10 credit cards. So don't worry about if you're not using the card, that's okay. It still counts in the calculation as long as the card is open. So let's just say hypothetically that of those 10 credit card accounts, let's just say that 5 of them are maxed out. Okay, so you have a $1,000 balance on 5 of those cards and a 0 balance on the other 5 cards. So obviously 1,000 times 5 is 5,000. So you have an aggregate balance of 5,000, an aggregate limit of 10,000. So let's do the math. Take 5,000 divided by 10,000, that's going to be 0.5, multiply that by 100, 50. So you're 50% utilized aggregate on your credit cards. All right, is that good or is that bad? It's not good. There's a ton of kind of advice and suggestions floating around on the world of the internet about that ratio. And some people talk about how you're supposed to keep it at 1%, you're supposed to keep it at 30%, you're supposed to keep it at 50%. In credit scoring models, the higher that ratio, the fewer points you're going to earn. That's just a reality of credit scoring systems. In FICO's system, as silly as this is going to sound, the optimal ratio is 1%. Now, that's next to impossible to not only hit, but hold month after month after month, and so I don't advise doing that. If you look at the people who have the highest credit scores in this country, so the folks that FICO refers to as high achievers or high flyers, these are the folks who are going to be 780 and above, elite scores, using any reasonable definition of the word. These people have a utilization ratio of around 7 to 8%. So I always say, shoot for less than 10%. It's a much easier number to hit, and it's a much easier number to hold. So that's FICO. VantageScore, it's a little bit different. VantageScore actually publishes that if you're at 30% or below, then you're doing well in their system. So they give you a little bit more leeway. So in my mind, since you're really managing one set of credit reports rather than trying to manage dozens and dozens of credit scoring systems, I always advise consumers to try to hit below 10%, which means you're doing well in FICO's credit scores and you're doing well in VantageScore's credit scores. And so really those two credit scoring systems they account for about 100% of the market in the US. And so I tend to always advise less than 10%. So let's talk about how you can get to 10%. Actually, there's 3 ways to get to 10%. Number one, because remember, this is just a simple division problem. Balance divided by limit equals utilization ratio. So if you can decrease one number or increase another number or some combination of both, then you're going to yield a lower percentage. So if you obviously pay down your balances or don't charge as much, then your ratio is going to go down. That's a mathematical certainty. If you have your credit limits increased or you add a new credit card to your credit reports that has an unused credit limit, then your ratio is also going to go down. That's a mathematical certainty. If you do a combination of both, pay down your balances a little, increase your credit limits some, that's also going to lead to a lower ratio and a higher score. Let me give you what I call an ethical credit score hack. So there are 2 dates that are relevant in your credit card account. The due date, and we all know what that is, and then the statement closing date. A lot of people don't know what the statement closing date is. The statement closing date is the end of the 30-day period that the credit card issuer is going to use to determine what your balance is going to be for that particular statement. So your statement is a combination of charges, interest, fees, minus payments and credits, and that's going to yield whatever balances that you owe on any particular statement. If you go online, you'll be able to easily see what your statement closing date is. If you pay your balance in full before your statement closing date, then the balance on your statement is going to be 0. And that's what's reported to the credit reporting agencies is whatever is on your statement. And so you still can use your card, you still get the fraud protections of using your card, you still get the rewards points or miles for using your card. And if you're going to pay the card in full anyways, then you don't really need the 21-day grace period. You can pay it before the statement closing date, which means your utilization ratio is going to be 0, which is absolutely fantastic. So check that out, try it. If you've got multiple credit cards that you use every month, that's fine. Just make sure you know what the statement closing date is and see if you can pay either the balance down as much as possible or pay it off before that date. That's if you don't really need the grace period. If you do need the grace period, that's fine. Then whatever your balance is on your statement, that's what's going to show up on your credit report. So for you, it's a little bit more difficult because you're going to have to actually get into a habit of having a lower and lower balance over time, which will yield that higher ratio and obviously a better score. So I appreciate your time. Thanks for listening. Get those balances lower and have a great rest of your day.
For more videos and credit tips from John Olsheimer, go to www.tradelinesupply.com.